Okay. Welcome to AP Comparative Government and Politics and AP Russian History with Dr. Brovkin. Today's lecture is about historical origins of Russia and Ukraine, which is a very important topic because of the current crisis in Russian-Ukrainian relations that could potentially become extremely dangerous. So before we understand the contemporary situation, it's important to understand what Ukraine is, what Ukrainians think they are, and what is its relation to Russia and what the Russians think they are in relation to Ukraine. Now, to make it quite blunt, up until about 25 years ago, up until 1921, most people thought that Russia and Ukraine is one and the same thing. Not only it's like the same people, it's the same culture, the same ethnicity, the same religion, the same everything. Ukraine is a part of Russia. That's how most people thought until 1991. When 1991 the Soviet Union collapsed and the Soviet Socialist Republic of Ukraine split away like 15 other republics, then there was this kind of a new understanding, Ukraine as a separate state. But even then, when they split up, all agreed, including Ukrainians, there should be no border, no physical border, like they say today between Northern Ireland and Ireland, that there should be a freedom of people, freedom of employment, complete freedom of movement between the two parts of what still was said as one people. Now today, the Ukrainian government wants to enter NATO and declares that the sworn number one enemy of Ukraine is Russia. And they keep talking about Russian aggression and so forth. So for the West, it's important to understand the way both think of each other, and especially the way Russia thinks of Ukraine. And in order to understand that that's a kind of a red line, that it's very difficult if they step too far into the demands of Ukrainian nationalists. So let's go back to the origins of Rus, which is called, and follow major stages in the development of these two parts of Russia. Now, the ancient name is Rus. That actually comes from a small territory which is in today's western Ukraine, and that still is called Ruthenia. If you look very attentively on the map, the territory sort of between Poland, Slovakia, and Romania is pretty much what today's Lvov area is. Lviv is the town. And in that area, there is an area that's called Ruthenia. And that's where the Rus comes from. So this is the original tribe of Eastern Slavs, next to the people who lived in the field, which is Poles. That means field people. And Slovaks, and these are a variation on the word Slavic. And then Slovenians is also a variation on the word Slavic. And Serbs, these are the people who have a serp, which means they cut grass, they're field people. So all of these are variations on related Slavic peoples. One of them was called Rus, or Ruthenian. Now, these people descended down the mountains to the valley and established a city that's called Kiev. And this is the beginning of what in the 7th, 8th centuries was known as Kievan Rus. So the Kievan Rus basically is a well-accepted notion even by Ukrainians today. They don't deny that it's called the Rus. And that is the territory of around Kiev, from the Carpathian Mountains down to Kiev. And beyond that, what is even on Polish maps is indicated as Dika Steppe, which means wild field, or the territory from Kiev to the Black Sea is open field. That's the way it's going, which means it's nomadic, open area where nomads of all kinds would pass through. So this was the situation about 9th century. The most important event of that time is, of course, the baptism of Russia, which is when in 980 Kievan Rus accepts Christianity. And the Grand Duke who did this baptism, his name is Vladimir, which if you translate this word, it means the leader of the world, or the possessor of the world, or the owner of the world, or which was all one and the same thing. The owner, the leader, the possessor of the world. That's Vladimir. Now he baptized Rus, and there's a big monument to him in Kiev to the present day, that he accepted Christianity from Byzantine Empire. That's extremely important because that puts Russia in a different boat of development than Western Slavs, like, such as Poles, who accepted Christianity from Germanic knights, who baptized them and gave them Catholicism. So this is like a historic divide between Western Slavs who become Catholic, like Poles and Croatians, and Eastern Slavs who become Orthodox, and that is the Serbs, the Bulgarians, Romanians, Greeks, Russians. All of these are Christians from the Byzantine Empire, and that means Orthodox Christians. Now, just as a note, when I was in Greece over the New Year's Eve, and of course you go to the church, and in Serbia in Bulgaria we spent New Year's Eve. The churches are identical, absolutely. You go to a Greek church as a Russian, you feel absolutely at home. It is the same icons, the same decor, the same singing. It's totally the same. So religious affiliation is extremely important. That puts Russia in this kind of Greek Orthodox direction. Now, there's no word Ukraine, and it wouldn't appear for another 500 years. So at this point, you're talking about Kievan Rus that begins to expand further. And so in 10th, 11th, 12th centuries, what's going on is that the Kievan Rus expands to the north. And the dukes are actually seizing new territory and establishing cities in the Central European plains. And these cities would be, one of them would be Moscow, and another would be Vladimir, and another one would be the Rostov. And one of the really important ones in the north is called Novgorod. So if you look at the map of Russia, it is pretty much Central European plain, extension of Kievan Rus. So Rus in the 12th, 13th, 14th century, it's really extension of Kievan Rus, one Rus, and it's still called that. Now, the very important point is that the Russians of that time, they mix with local population, and that does create regional differences. For example, in the north, Novgorodians, they are virtually indistinguishable in their folk culture, in their customs and houses with the Vikings. So the Vikings are a big part of Russian culture. The Vikings crossed all over Russia, and in fact, they were the founders of the ruling dynasty that is connected with the first ruler, whose name is Rurik. Now, the Vikings had a trade route, which is called from the Black Sea to the Baltic Sea. And so using the rivers, among them Volga River and the Moscow River and other rivers, they would actually pull the boats and crisscross Eastern Europe from the Baltic to the Black Sea. And so it's because of these trade routes that the Vikings were a heavy presence, especially in northern Russia, and they mixed with local population. And when you look at the villages and their customs, in museums in Sweden and those in northern Russia, it's identical. So it's a blending of culture. Moreover, the Russian word for the north is sever, which means sverige, which means identical to the word Sweden. So the Russian word north is what the Swedes call themselves, Sverige. So it means the north. So this also is another indication of how close the two cultures were. Now, in the south, it's different. So in the south, there were a lot of itinerant tribes, Khazars and Pechenegs and others, and the southern Slavs, which would be future Ukrainians, they look a little different and their customs a little different because they intermix with other people. Nevertheless, it still is one Kievan Rus with the expansion to the entire plain of Eastern Europe, Eastern European plain, today's Central Russia, that goes all the way to from Black Sea to the Baltic Sea, and the lands of Novgorod. Okay, then comes another big event, which is the Tatar conquest, which is in 1221. The Genghis Khan's grandson, Bati, he comes and conquers Russia. He also, as you know, conquered the rest of Asia, including Baghdad and Damascus and so on, and India and the rest of it. So they conquer Russia, and Russia loses its independence for about 300 years, 250 years or so. So this is the called Tatar-Mongol yoke in Russian history. So that's from 1220 to about it wasn't like one date that it disappeared, but it was a process that little by little Russia acquired more and more independence and then finally broke it. One could say by 1500, Russia is an independent country, which is called Muscovy, because it's the rise of Moscow. So let me explain how that happened. The most important thing is that the Tatar Mongols did not want to extinguish Christianity. They did not. They were not going to convert people to Islam as Muslims did in Syria and in North Africa. They encouraged people to convert to Islam. The Tatars didn't. They really didn't care. And they themselves were not Muslim at first, and only with centuries of cultural interaction they become Muslims. Some of them actually become Christians. So the religion issue was not an issue. The point was that what they wanted was money. And the way they set it up is that they settled themselves on the Volga River and further out towards Central Asia, and they had these Russian dukes pay them money. That's all they wanted. So every year, at a certain point, the Russian dukes would come to Sarai, which is a city in Volga, and pay the money, and that's all they wanted. So there was no actual occupation. There was no population control of Tatars over the Muscovy. No, it was pretty much like paying the dues. So this is number one. Number two, western side of Kievan Rus did not get occupied by the Mongols. So that's what is going to be later called Ukraine, but nobody knows that title yet. But why is that? Let me explain why. It has to do with fields and forests. The Mongols are horse people. They ride the horse, they eat the horse, they fight on the horse, and for the horses you need to have fields. Horses don't like forests because in forests there's not much grass. So in other words, and it's much more difficult to advance your army through a thick forest. So that means that if you look at the geography of Russia, the areas that are plains, that's the south and the east, this is occupied by the Mongols, including Moscow. But not Novgorod, which is already northern part, and my family comes from northern Russia, and the Novgorodians extremely proud that they had never been conquered by the Tatars. And so the further east, the further west you move, the more forests there are. And so there comes a point where even though they took Kiev, they did not control further out territories that used to be Kievan Rus, and these fall under the reign of the Polish kingdom. And in the Middle Ages, like 1300, 1400, even 1500, is a huge, powerful state that goes pretty much from the Baltic Sea almost to the Black Sea, but not quite, but certainly to almost to Kiev, which is called Rzecz Pospolita, which is a powerful Polish state, which is together with Lithuanian. So it's called Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And this is the point. Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth owns the original Rus, the original where Ruthenia comes from, and the original lands around Kiev. So something that would later would be known as Ukraine, but that is the original stem area of the Russians that is taken by the Poles. Or you could put it this way: Russia is divided by the two owners. One is the Tatar Mongols, and the other is Polish occupation. So Russia doesn't exist. It is controlled by two powerful countries, Polish Lithuania on the western side and the Tatar Mongols on the other. Now what happened